The streets of Beirut were buzzing with the typical energy of a January afternoon in 1979. The intense movement of cars, the street vendors shouting their offers, the children running through the narrow alleys, and the lingering aroma of spices and coffee emanating from commercial establishments created the everyday atmosphere of the Lebanese capital. No one could imagine that this apparent normality was about to be interrupted by one of the most audacious espionage operations in contemporary history. In a modest 8th-floor apartment in a busy building on Verdun Street, a young woman of English appearance was calmly engaged in painting urban landscapes. Her neighbors knew her only as an eccentric artist who showed a particular affection for the street cats of the area. For all practical purposes, she represented just another foreigner who had chosen Beirut as a temporary refuge for her artistic pursuits. The tranquility of her daily routine, marked by long hours spent on the balcony observing the city's movement through her canvases, would never arouse suspicion about her true identity or purpose. However, on that specific day, her eyes were not exclusively focused on capturing the architectural nuances of the Lebanese urban landscape. Her focus was directed towards a red Volkswagen strategically parked on the opposite sidewalk, a vehicle that, to any casual observer, was just another car among the many occupying the available spaces on the busy public road. The woman who presented herself as a painter had established a meticulously planned routine over the preceding months, creating a convincing persona that allowed her to observe without attracting any kind of attention or questioning from local residents. Her dedication to the abandoned felines in the neighborhood had earned the sympathy of nearby merchants, who frequently saw her offering food and water to the needy animals. This image of kindness and artistic eccentricity served as a perfect cover for her real activities of surveillance and reconnaissance. For consecutive weeks, she had painstakingly mapped the movement patterns characterizing that specific area of Beirut, mentally recording the busiest times, the routes most used by vehicles and pedestrians, and especially the preferred routes of one man in particular. Ali Hassan Salame, known in international intelligence circles as the Red Prince, had become the main target of a revenge operation that mobilized considerable resources from the Israeli intelligence service. The man who inspired as much fear as respect among his Palestinian followers carried on his shoulders the responsibility for one of the most traumatic episodes in Israel's recent history, the massacre that claimed the lives of 11 Israeli athletes during the Munich Olympic Games in 1972. That event had deeply marked the Israeli national consciousness and triggered a response that would extend for consecutive years through multiple clandestine operations coordinated by the Mossad. The operation, codenamed Wrath of God, represented much more than a simple retaliation. It constituted a clear demonstration that Israel would not allow terrorist acts against its citizens to go unpunished, regardless of the time elapsed or the logistical complexity required to reach those responsible. Salame had managed to escape several previous elimination attempts, demonstrating a remarkable capacity for anticipation and evasion that consistently frustrated Israeli plans. His protection network included not only highly trained bodyguards, but also his own intelligence system that kept him informed about possible threats. The luxurious life he enjoyed in Beirut, frequenting exclusive establishments and maintaining relationships with prominent figures in Lebanese society, had created a false sense of security that would be exploited by the Israeli agents. The woman on the balcony represented only a small piece of a much more complex puzzle, an operation that had involved months of meticulous planning and the coordination of multiple agents infiltrated in different strategic positions throughout the city. Every movement of Salame had been catalogued, every route analyzed, every personal habit transformed into valuable information for the construction of the final plan. The apparent simplicity of everyday Beirut life concealed a sophisticated network of surveillance and preparation that would soon culminate in one of the most impactful political assassinations of the 20th century. The true identity of the woman the neighbors knew as a melancholic artist remained carefully hidden beneath layers of a meticulously elaborated biographical construction. Erica Maria Chambers had been born and raised in London, within a family that had experienced both the privileges of the British aristocracy and the deep scars left by Nazi barbarism in Central Europe. Her father, Marcus Chambers, had distinguished himself as an internationally renowned racing driver, achieving memorable victories on the most prestigious tracks in the European continent, including the legendary Le Mans endurance race. The paternal lineage dated back generations of British naval officers, a military tradition that gave the family a respectable position in the rigid English social hierarchy. On the other hand, her mother, Lona Negros, carried with her the painful memory of a Czech Jewish family virtually decimated by the Nazi extermination camps during World War II. Lona's survival had been almost miraculous, the result of a desperate escape that had brought her to England during the darkest years of the global conflict. This combination of British aristocratic heritage and European Jewish trauma would profoundly shape Erica's personality and future motivations, creating a duality that would make her simultaneously privileged and marked by historical tragedy. The childhood spent in the elegant Holland Park neighbourhood in West London provided Erica with all the advantages of elite British education, including attendance at prestigious private schools and unrestricted access to the most refined social circles in the English capital. However, the apparent family stability gradually dissolved during her formative years, culminating in her parents' separation while she was still a teenager. Remaining under her mother's care, Erica developed a complex personality that combined the discipline typical of traditional British education with a natural inclination for impulsive and risky behaviours. During her university studies in geography at the University of Southampton, professors and colleagues noted her exemplary academic dedication, but also her propensity for activities that bordered on recklessness. The owner of a small red Mini Cooper, she had acquired the habit of driving the vehicle through urban streets at speeds that defied both legal limits and basic prudence, a characteristic that revealed a personality attracted to high-risk and adrenaline-fueled situations. This psychological predisposition for controlled danger would later attract the attention of Mossad recruiters, who identified in her the ideal profile for complex clandestine operations. After completing her higher education, Erica embarked on a brief experience in Australia, apparently motivated by the desire to expand her geographical and cultural horizons. However, her stay on the oceanic continent was surprisingly short, and in a short time she redirected her plans to a completely different and apparently unexpected destination, Israel. The decision to continue her studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem temporarily coincided with a period of intense turbulence in the geopolitical scenario of the Middle East, marked especially by the still-present reverberations of the Munich massacre. The tragic events that had victimized the Israeli athletes continued to dominate international headlines and profoundly influence Israel's security policies. In that specific context, the Mossad intensified its recruitment efforts, seeking individuals who presented very particular characteristics for infiltration missions in hostile territories. Erica represented an almost perfect candidate for these purposes. Her fluency in the German language, a maternal inheritance from Central Europe, combined with her typically Anglo-Saxon physical appearance, offered unique operational possibilities. More importantly, her absence of physical traits that could identify her as Jewish constituted a fundamental strategic advantage in operations that required movement in predominantly Arab environments. Mossad officials used specific terminology to describe agents like Erica. She was considered clean, that is, devoid of any characteristic that could compromise her cover in sensitive missions. The revelation of documents detailing the tragic fate of her Jewish relatives in the Nazi concentration camps represented a definitive moment in Erica's trajectory, providing the emotional motivation necessary for her formal acceptance as an operative of the Israeli intelligence service. The process of transforming a young British university student into a highly specialized clandestine agent required years of intensive and meticulous preparation. The training provided by the Mossad covered much more than conventional espionage techniques, encompassing a complete reformulation of Erica's personality and behavioral patterns. For consecutive months, she was subjected to psychological exercises designed to strengthen her ability to maintain multiple identities simultaneously, without allowing traits of her original personality to compromise the authenticity of her disguises. The construction of operational legends represented one of the most complex competencies developed during this training period, requiring her to memorize entire fictional biographies with sufficient detail to withstand interrogations or superficial investigations. Every aspect of her new identity, from culinary preferences to invented childhood traumas, had to be internalized so convincingly that it became second nature. Simultaneously, she received training in advanced observation techniques, clandestine communication, handling specialized electronic equipment, and evasion methods in emergency situations. Physical preparation included conditioning to resist prolonged deprivation, capability in hand-to-hand combat, and familiarization with various armaments, although her specific mission did not foresee direct confrontations. In 1975, as part of a carefully orchestrated long-term strategy, Erika was established in West Germany as a sleeper agent, assuming a convincing civilian identity and maintaining apparently normal professional activities. This preparation phase served multiple strategic purposes. First, it created a temporal and geographical distance between her presence in Israel and future operations, hindering eventual investigative connections. Second, it allowed her to develop a documented personal history in European territory, strengthening her cover for subsequent missions. Third, if Salame's elimination was successful, the subsequent investigation could be directed towards the German intelligence services, thus protecting the true origin of the operation. For 3 full years, Erika lived a deliberately common existence in German territory, building superficial but credible relationships, establishing regular work routines, and creating a discreet but verifiable social presence. This operational patience represented one of the characteristic hallmarks of the Mossad, demonstrating a willingness to invest considerable resources and prolonged time in the preparation of high-priority operations. At the end of 1978, when preparations for the final phase of the mission were activated, Erika requested and obtained a Lebanese visa through the embassy in Bonn, using documentation that identified her as Penelope, a variation of her cover name that had been carefully constructed during the previous years. Her arrival in Beirut marked the beginning of the operational phase proper, requiring her to put into practice all the years of training and psychological preparation. The apartment she rented on Verdun Street had been selected after detailed analysis of the routes used by Salame, offering not only the ideal geographical position for observation, but also multiple escape options should the operation be compromised. The persona of an eccentric artist with a predilection for abandoned cats served as an almost perfect cover, justifying her constant presence on the balcony and her apparently casual interest in the movements of the street. Her supposed philanthropic projects related to the well-being of Palestinian children provided a convincing explanation for her presence in Beirut, creating a narrative that resonated positively with the local population and lessened any suspicion about her true motivations. During the weeks preceding the final operation, Erika established predictable routines that naturally integrated her into the neighborhood's community life, gradually transforming her from an observed foreigner into an accepted and practically invisible resident. Ali Hassan Salame personified the complexity and contradictions characteristic of the Middle East conflicts during the decades following the creation of the State of Israel. For his Palestinian compatriots, he represented much more than a military commander. He was a symbol of national resistance, a brilliant strategist capable of inflicting significant damage on the Israeli enemy through audacious and meticulously planned operations. His reputation had been built gradually through operational successes that demonstrated not only personal courage, but also an exceptional capacity for logistical coordination and political propaganda. The nickname Red Prince reflected both his aristocratic origin and his association with operations that frequently resulted in bloodshed. Born into a prominent Palestinian family, Salame had grown up immersed in the political culture of resistance, absorbing from a young age the codes of honor and revenge that characterized the Palestinian struggle against Israeli expansion. His formal education, complemented by military training in specialized camps, had prepared him to assume leadership positions in clandestine organizations that operated through a combination of urban guerrilla and international terrorist operations. The connection between Salame and Yasser Arafat transcended merely professional issues, constituting a personal partnership based on mutual trust and shared strategic vision. Arafat had identified leadership qualities in the young Salame that made him a natural candidate for succession, a prospect that significantly increased his political value and, consequently, the priority of his elimination from the Israeli perspective. Salame's participation in the planning and execution of the Munich massacre had dramatically elevated his international profile, simultaneously transforming him into a Palestinian hero and a priority target for Israeli revenge. The events that occurred in the German Olympic Village did not merely represent an isolated terrorist operation, but constituted part of a broader strategy aimed at internationalizing the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, forcing the international community to recognize the existence and claims of the Palestinian national movement. The choice of the Olympic Games as the stage for this demonstration had been deliberate, exploiting maximum global media exposure to ensure that the Palestinian cause could not be ignored by international public opinion. From a tactical point of view, the operation had demonstrated the capacity of Palestinian groups to hit Israeli targets even in European territory, breach supposedly impenetrable security perimeters, and maintain prolonged negotiations with German authorities under intense media scrutiny. However, the tragic outcome that resulted in the death of all the kidnapped Israeli athletes also provided Israel with a powerful moral justification for subsequent retaliations, creating a cycle of violence that would extend for decades. For the Mossad, Salame represented not only an enemy to be eliminated, but also a definitive test of Israel's capacity to protect its citizens through offensive operations in hostile territory. Salame's daily life in Beirut reflected his prominent position within the hierarchy of the Palestine Liberation Organization. He maintained multiple residences, frequented exclusive establishments in the Lebanese capital, and sustained relationships with influential figures from both the political and social worlds. This apparently normal existence contrasted dramatically with his clandestine activities, creating a dichotomy that required constant vigilance and adaptation on the part of his security team. His personal habits, meticulously catalogued by Israeli agents, included regular visits to gyms, Turkish bath establishments, and the apartments of known society women in Beirut. Each of these locations represented a potential opportunity for an assassination, but also presented specific challenges related to security issues, the presence of innocent civilians, and escape possibilities. The protection network surrounding Salame included not only professional bodyguards, but also strategically positioned informants at key points in the city, creating an early warning system that had frustrated previous attempts at hostile approach. The complex operation aimed at eliminating the Red Prince required the simultaneous coordination of multiple specialized agents, each performing specific functions within a general plan that had been refined over months of meticulous preparation. The agent, known only by the codename D, represented perhaps the riskiest element of the entire operation, having managed to infiltrate directly into Salame's close social circle through an elaborate identity construction that presented him as a European businessman interested in investment opportunities in Lebanon. This penetration into the target's immediate environment provided access to privileged information about personal routines, security preferences, and behavioral vulnerabilities that would be crucial for the success of the final mission. For consecutive weeks, Agent D carefully cultivated a relationship of trust with Salame, participating in social dinners, cultural events, and business meetings that allowed him to observe in detail the security protocols used by the Palestinian leader. Each encounter represented a valuable opportunity to collect data on preferred times, habitual routes, regular companions, and frequented locations, information that was later transmitted through clandestine channels to the Israeli Operations Center. Simultaneously, 13 other Mossad agents established themselves in strategic positions throughout Beirut, creating a comprehensive surveillance network that monitored not only Salame's movements, but also the activities of his security teams and possible changes in behavior patterns that could indicate discovery of the operation. This multiple and coordinated presence allowed for operational redundancy and tactical flexibility, ensuring that the mission could proceed even if some elements were compromised or neutralized. Erica Chambers, operating under the identity of Penelope, occupied a particularly critical position in this structure, functioning simultaneously as a primary observer and a potential executor of the final phase of the operation. Her cover as an employee of a non-governmental organization dedicated to aiding Palestinian children provided a convincing justification for her prolonged presence in the region, in addition to creating a public image that contrasted completely with any suspicion of involvement in espionage or sabotage activities. During 6 consecutive weeks, intensive surveillance on Salame revealed specific behavioral patterns that would be exploited by the operation's planners. It was discovered that he maintained a regular relationship with Georgina Risk, a high society woman in Beirut, visiting her apartment in the Snoobar neighborhood almost daily during the afternoons. These visits followed predictable routes that included sections of Verdun Street, exactly where Erica had established her observation point. In addition to romantic encounters, Salame regularly frequented fitness establishments and Turkish bathhouses, activities that offered alternative opportunities for an attack. Israeli military planners seriously considered the possibility of eliminating the target during one of these visits to the Turkish baths, where security would necessarily be reduced and escape possibilities limited. However, this option was rejected due to the unacceptable risk of causing innocent civilian casualties, a consideration that reflected both ethical concerns and calculations of political propaganda. The final decision concentrated on the use of a car bomb, a methodology that offered temporal precision, guaranteed impact, and possibilities for remote execution that minimized risks for the operators. The chosen vehicle, a common red Volkswagen, was carefully prepared with 100 kilograms of explosives disguised in the trunk so as to go unnoticed during superficial inspections. The parking location was determined after detailed analysis of traffic flows, approach angles, escape routes, and positioning of surrounding buildings. Each variable had been calculated to maximize the impact on the specific target, while minimizing collateral damage and preserving the chances of successful evacuation of the operational team. The morning of January 22, 1979, began with the deceptive normality that characterized Beirut during those turbulent days of the late 70s. The streets of the Lebanese capital were bustling with their usual energy, merchants preparing their shops for another day of business, students hurrying to universities, office workers navigating the morning traffic on their routine routes to work. Urban life pulsed with a familiar rhythm, creating an atmosphere of everyday routine that completely masked the extraordinary tension dominating a small group of individuals strategically positioned at specific points in the city. On Verdun Street, the red Volkswagen remained parked in the same position for several days, its presence already naturally integrated into the local urban landscape. Pedestrians passed by it without dedicating any special attention to the vehicle, which externally presented no characteristics that could arouse suspicion or curiosity. The explosive charge carefully disguised inside represented the culmination of months of logistical preparation and tactical planning. But to any casual observer, it was just another car among the dozens occupying the available spaces on the busy public road. On the 8th floor of the building that offered a direct view of the location where the vehicle was parked, Erica Chambers maintained her established routine as an artist dedicated to observing and recording Beirut urban life. Her canvases and brushes were arranged convincingly on the balcony, creating the impression that she was genuinely dedicated to artistic creation. However, her attention was entirely focused on monitoring the street movements, especially any sign that could indicate the approach of Salame's convoy. During the previous weeks, she had completely memorized the temporal patterns of the Palestinian leader's visits to Georgina Risk, managing to predict with considerable precision the most probable times for his passage through the observation area. The final preparations for the operation included multiple checks of communication systems between the various agents, confirmation of the previously established escape routes, and precise coordination with the Israeli vessel discreetly positioned off the Lebanese coast. The commander of the operation, Mike Harari, followed the development of events from the deck of an Israeli missile boat, using telescopic observation equipment that allowed him to maintain direct visual contact with the planned assassination location. This position offered not only real-time operational supervision, but also the capacity to coordinate the immediate evacuation of the team as soon as the mission was concluded. Around 3:30 in the afternoon of that fateful day, the convoy consisting of 2 Chevrolets left Georgina Risk's apartment, transporting Ali Hassan Salame towards a family celebration related to his mother's birthday. The movement of the vehicles followed exactly the routes predicted by Mossad analysts, confirming the accuracy of the intelligence collected during the weeks of intensive surveillance. At 3:35 in the afternoon, when the first Chevrolet approached the intersection where the Volkswagen was waiting, Erica received the signal to activate the explosive device. The ensuing explosion instantly transformed the normality of the Beirut afternoon into absolute chaos. The impact completely destroyed Salame's convoy, immediately eliminating his 4 bodyguards and causing the death of 4 innocent passers-by, including a German nun and a British secretary who happened to be in the area at the time of the detonation. 16 other people suffered injuries of varying severity, demonstrating the destructive power of the charge used. Salame initially survived the direct impact, but his injuries were too severe to allow for any hope of recovery. Emergency medical services quickly transported him to the American University of Beirut hospital, where a team of surgeons desperately tried to save his life. However, at 4 hours and 3 minutes in the afternoon, just 28 minutes after the explosion, Ali Hassan Salame was pronounced dead, thus ending one of the Mossad's most prolonged and intensive hunts. While emergency services were still working to rescue victims and control the situation at the explosion site, Erica had already begun her planned evacuation, quickly abandoning the apartment that had been her operational base for months and heading towards the coastal meeting point, where an Israeli vessel was waiting to transport her out of Lebanese territory. The operation had been executed with clockwork precision, demonstrating the effectiveness of the planning and coordination methods developed by the Israeli intelligence service over decades of experience in complex clandestine operations. Ali Hassan Salame's funeral turned into one of the largest public demonstrations of political mourning in Beirut's recent history, attracting more than 100,000 Palestinians and sympathizers who filled the streets of the Lebanese capital to pay their last respects to the man they considered a national hero and martyr of the Palestinian cause. The crowd accompanying the funeral procession demonstrated not only grief over the loss of a charismatic leader, but also anger over the perception that once again Israel had managed to hit a high-priority target in supposedly safe territory. Yasser Arafat personally carried the coffin of his protege and possible successor, pronouncing words during the ceremony that would reveal the extent of the impact caused by the Israeli operation. "We have lost a lion." This public declaration was not merely rhetorical. It reflected the recognition that Salame's elimination represented a significant strategic blow to the entire organizational structure of the Palestinian resistance. Immediately after the funeral, Arafat issued specific orders for all those responsible for the assassination to be identified and punished, initiating an intensive investigation that mobilized considerable resources from Palestinian intelligence services and sympathizers. However, by the time these investigations finally began to yield concrete results, the Mossad agents had already completely disappeared from Lebanese territory, evacuated through maritime routes that had been meticulously prepared as an integral part of the operational plan. The discovery of the British passport abandoned in Penelope's apartment provided the first concrete clue about the real identity of at least one of the operators involved in the operation. For subsequent years, intelligence analysts from various countries debated whether Erica Chambers represented a real identity or merely an artificial construction created by the Mossad to confuse later investigations. The comparison with other known cases, especially that of Peter Scriver, another agent involved in the operation who later proved to be non-existent, fueled theories that the entire narrative about a British woman recruited by the Israeli service might constitute an elaborate disinformation operation intended to protect the true origin and methodology of the mission. Aaron Klein, an Israeli author specializing in the documentation of retaliation operations related to the Munich massacre, confirmed in his investigative works that Erica Chambers was indeed a real person, not a fictional invention of the Mossad. According to Klein, she represented what intelligence services classify as an ad hoc operator, that is, an individual recruited specifically for a single mission, subsequently discharged when their usefulness was exhausted. This procedure, although common in clandestine operations, created ethical and practical dilemmas related to the subsequent fate of these temporary collaborators. Wilhelm Dietl, a German specialist in Mossad activities, managed to confirm Erika's real existence through direct contacts with members of her British family during the 90s. Erika's father, still alive during that period, admitted to maintaining sporadic contact with his daughter through Christmas cards that regularly arrived with Israeli postmarks, indicating her voluntary or forced permanence in Israeli territory decades after the Beirut operation. These limited communications suggested that Erika had effectively been integrated into the Mossad's agent protection system, receiving a new identity and logistical support in exchange for her permanent silence about the operations in which she had participated. Nicholas Mordaunt Chambers, Erika's brother and a prominent figure in the British judiciary system, became a Queen's Counsel in 1985 and subsequently a respected civil judge, representing a paradigmatic example of the English legal establishment. When investigative journalists attempted to obtain confirmation about his sister's identity, he responded with carefully formulated evasions that neither confirmed nor denied the allegations, using precisely ambiguous legal language that protected both his professional position and possible family confidentiality commitments. His public statements were limited to acknowledging the legitimacy of the journalistic investigations, without providing any substantive information that could compromise Erika's security or violate any non-disclosure agreements established with Israeli authorities. The transformation of a young British university student into a clandestine agent and subsequently into a political ghost illustrates the moral and practical complexities that characterize the world of international espionage during the Cold War period. For her Beirut neighbors, Penelope would forever remain in memory as the gentle English woman who cared for the street cats and painted urban landscapes. For Israel, Erika Chambers represented the personification of the national determination to protect its citizens through offensive operations in hostile territories. For the international community of analysts and historians, she symbolizes the ethical ambiguities of clandestine operations that, although technically successful, raise permanent questions about the human costs of political revenge and the individual destinies of those who agree to serve as instruments of state policies that transcend their personal lives.